Hi there. Today I'm going to show you 5 seemingly normal photos, but each one hides a disturbing story you won't believe. First, let's look at this photo, which appears to be just an ordinary shot of an airplane preparing for takeoff at an airport. A normal scene, nothing unusual about it, but behind it lies a tragic story that shocked the world. And this heartbreaking story revolves around a boy named Keith Sapsford. Keith was born in 1956 in Sydney, Australia, and he was 14 years old at that time. From a young age, he was fascinated by adventure stories and wanted to travel everywhere. His parents had taken him on trips, but that wasn't enough to satisfy him. Keith frequently ran away from home to wander around. His parents had to search for him and bring him back multiple times, even sending him to boarding school to keep him in place. But after just 2 weeks, Keith found a way to escape again, and this time it would be his final adventure. On February 21, 1970, Keith ran to Kingsford Smith Airport in Sydney. Back then, aviation security wasn't nearly as strict as it is today. He slipped into the aircraft area and approached a Douglas DC-8 that was preparing for a flight to Tokyo. Near the landing gear, there was a small empty compartment, just big enough for a person to crawl into, and Keith crawled in. The DC-8 slowly taxied and then took off. As it happened, that day there was an amateur photographer named John Gilpin on the ground who was coincidentally taking pictures of airplanes. A week later, when developing his film, he was horrified to discover that among the photos he had taken, there was one that sent chills down his spine. Here is the actual full photograph capturing the moment Keith fell from the plane. In the frame, we can see a small dot, that's Keith, sucked out of the wheel well and dropping straight toward the ground. It's believed he fell from a height of 200 feet. Clearly, at this height, Keith couldn't have survived. And if you're wondering, even if Keith hadn't fallen out, he still wouldn't have survived, because inside the landing gear compartment, temperatures can drop to dozens of degrees below zero, and there's virtually no oxygen for him to breathe. Second, this photo appears to show just an ordinary moment, 7 astronauts smiling and waving inside the spacecraft cabin. But in reality, this was their last photograph. Just days later, the entire Columbia crew would never return to Earth. The STS-107 mission launched on January 16, 2003. The crew consisted of 7 people, including scientists and research specialists from the United States, Israel, and India. Throughout their 16 days in orbit, everything went smoothly. They regularly sent back enthusiastic images, smiles, excitement, and pride at seeing the world from above. This is a photo of the shuttle during liftoff. Everything seemed normal, but actually, if you look carefully, you'll see something falling off. This was actually a piece of insulating foam from the fuel tank that broke off during the shuttle's launch. And this foam piece struck the left wing of the shuttle. This seemingly minor detail was actually the source of the tragedy for the crew. In reality, the impact left a large hole, weakening the wing's heat resistance capability. On February 1, 2003, Columbia began its journey back to Earth. When the shuttle entered the atmosphere, friction created temperatures of over 1,500 degrees. However, at this moment, sensors recorded a sudden spike in temperature. It turned out that during launch, the insulating foam had collided with the shuttle's left wing, causing a small leak in the left wing. Very quickly, Columbia caught fire and exploded in the Texas sky, breaking into thousands of pieces that fell to the ground. All 7 astronauts died instantly. The explosion shocked the entire world. People found shuttle debris scattered mainly across Texas and Louisiana. The most haunting aspect was, the photos they took before landing, their bright smiles, radiant eyes, were completely opposite to what the astronauts had to endure before death. That they were burned alive at temperatures that could melt even diamonds. Third, at first glance, this is just a photo of some students in a psychology study at university. But behind it was one of the most infamous experiments in the history of psychology. In 1971, a job posting appeared at Stanford University. It called for male students to participate in a psychological experiment about prison life, paying $15 per day. 24 people signed up. They were randomly divided, 12 as prisoners, 12 as guards. To increase realism, real police came to arrest the prisoner group. Once inside the prison, they no longer had names, only numbers. The guard group received uniforms, wooden batons, and complete control. Those playing guards were required to be strict with the prisoners. But this very requirement to be harsh, even cruel, turned the entire experiment into one of history's scandals. On the first day, there were no major incidents. But by the second day, prisoners began to rebel. One guard used a fire extinguisher to spray directly into the cell. After that, punishments appeared constantly. Forced push-ups at any time, bathroom privileges revoked and replaced with a bucket. Some had bags placed over their heads, and some were even forced to remove their clothing. According to plan, the experiment was to last 2 weeks. But by just the 6th day, Dr. Philip Zimbardo, the organizer, had to stop it. Many prisoners after the experiment fell into a state of panic and suffered serious psychological trauma. Zimbardo published the results. Ordinary people can become cruel when given power in specific environments. However, the experiment was heavily criticized, and people believed the experiment's results were unreliable because, first, the participants lacked diversity. All guards were young male students. Second, the instruction to be cruel from the beginning skewed the results. Third, the demon characteristics phenomenon caused both prisoners and guards to behave according to what they thought the researcher wanted. Fourth, at first glance, this is just an ordinary photo, a young woman with a gaunt face sitting in a room with priests. But in reality, this captures a moment from one of the most famous exorcisms of the 20th century. And a seemingly small detail in this story, her parents stopping her medication, was actually the starting point of the tragedy. Anneliese Michel was born in 1952 in Germany. At age 16, she began having epileptic seizures and was diagnosed with mental disorders. From 1968 to the early 1970s, she was treated with anti-seizure medication and sedatives. But her condition didn't improve. Anneliese exhibited abnormal behaviors, unprovoked anger, throwing objects, eating insects, hearing voices in her head. By 1975, Anneliese's parents began believing that their daughter wasn't just mentally ill, but possessed by demons. But this very decision, stopping medical treatment and instead inviting priests to perform exorcisms, opened the door to a chain of tragic events. From 1975 to 1976, Anneliese underwent a total of 67 exorcism sessions, 1 to 2 times per week. Throughout this process, she gradually stopped eating, her body weakening rapidly. Many photos still capture her exhausted, skeletal appearance during the rituals. But I mean, it was understandable if her parents believed their daughter was possessed by demons, because there were also many chilling rumors that spread about this case. On July 1, 1976, Anneliese Michel died at home at age 23. The official cause, malnutrition and dehydration, after months of barely eating or drinking. Fifth, this story involves this photograph, which shows just a young man sitting on a mountainside, with green forest and mountains behind him. But behind this photo lies a somewhat tragic yet courageous story. The man in the photo is named David Johnston, born in 1949 in Illinois, USA. During his college years, he was exceptionally skilled in geology. After graduation, David became an expert at the United States Geological Survey, USGS. Not only was he highly competent professionally, but he also loved adventure and was always passionate about his work. Everything began in 1980, when Mount St. Helens in Washington state started showing unusual signs, a series of small earthquakes and violent steam eruptions. David was sent to observe this phenomenon. He set up a temporary research camp just a few kilometers away from the volcano's crater. On May 17th, everything was still quiet. This famous photograph was taken right at the position where David was observing. But just one day later, disaster struck. On the morning of May 18, 1980, at 8:32 a.m., the entire north face of St. Helens suddenly collapsed, creating an unprecedented massive landslide. Billions of tons of earth and rock poured down, sweeping away the entire forest below. The air became thick with ash and dust, and the sky turned pitch black. Immediately after, the volcano erupted violently, with a column of smoke rising over 20 kilometers high. The landscape changed beyond belief. The lush green forest below became barren ground. Thousands of trees were uprooted and swept into Spirit Lake, turning the lake surface into a sea of floating logs. About 200 houses in the surrounding area were destroyed, and the sky across the entire region was shrouded in ash pollution. A total of 57 people died in the disaster, including our hero, David Johnston. It's estimated that without the timely warnings from David and his colleagues, the death toll could have reached hundreds, even thousands. So perhaps this photo is more heroic than frightening.